There is a two-word exchange that happened inside Charing Cross Hospital in London on the 9th of January 2026 that, in its own quiet way, said more about where Catherine, Princess of Wales, now stands than almost any of the spectacular public appearances that have followed it. She and William were visiting chemotherapy patients and hospital volunteers, and a volunteer who worked on the chemotherapy ward mentioned to them how patients and their families often sit together in those units for hours at a stretch, waiting, hoping, trying to fill the long, slow time that serious treatment demands. Kate looked at her and said simply, "I know." Then she touched William's arm beside her and said, "We know." Two words. Not a speech, not a carefully prepared statement, not a posed photograph with a carefully chosen caption. Just the quiet, immediate recognition of someone who has been in those rooms herself, who understands from the inside what those hours feel like, who carries in her own body the specific knowledge of what it means to sit in a hospital and trust that the medicine is working. That moment, small and unrehearsed and entirely human, is the heart of what Kate's comeback actually represents. Not simply a return to public duties, a return as someone different, someone shaped by something that changed her in ways she is only beginning to fully understand herself, and that the public, watching her come back, is only beginning to fully see. To understand the magnitude of what she has navigated and what her return to full public life represents, you need to go back to the weeks that preceded her diagnosis announcement in March of 2024, because those weeks matter as much as what came after. She had undergone major abdominal surgery in January of that year, and the palace's initial statements had been deliberately vague about the nature of the procedure, describing it as planned surgery for a non-cancerous condition, while noting she would be out of public duties for several months. What the palace did not say, because it did not yet know, was that post-operative tests conducted after the initial surgery had discovered something that no one had anticipated. The condition had been treated as benign. The tissue that came back from pathology told a different story. In the weeks between that discovery and the March video announcement, Kate and William were processing something privately that almost no one outside their immediate circle knew was happening, explaining it carefully to their 3 children, meeting with medical teams about treatment options, and managing the daily reality of their royal responsibilities against a backdrop of private fear that would have been overwhelming for anyone in any circumstances, let alone someone whose every public move is tracked and discussed by tens of millions of people. The conspiracy theories that flourished during those weeks of silence before the March announcement became one of the stranger chapters in modern royal media history. Social media, in the information vacuum created by the palace's discretion, filled with speculation of every variety, some benign, some extraordinarily dark, some simply absurd. Photographs were claimed to be digitally manipulated. Theories circulated about separations, about hidden illness, about institutional cover-ups of various kinds. A Mother's Day photograph released in an attempt to demonstrate Kate was well and recovering was found on close examination to contain some editing irregularities, prompting a formal correction from the palace and intensifying the scrutiny rather than quieting it. The palace's traditional communications approach, silence as dignity, which had served the institution across so many previous crises, was failing in real time against the specific dynamics of an internet era in which silence is simply filled by whatever the collective imagination produces. When the video came on the 22nd of March 2024, it landed with the force of something genuine breaking through the noise. She was sitting on a bench in the gardens of Adelaide Cottage in Windsor, wearing a blue and white striped shirt, looking directly at the camera, speaking carefully and simply about what had happened. She said the cancer had been discovered following the surgery, that it had come as a huge shock, that she and William had been doing everything they could to process and manage it privately for the sake of their young family. She said it had taken time to explain everything to George, Charlotte, and Louis in a way appropriate for them and to reassure them that she was going to be okay. She said she was well and getting stronger every day by focusing on the things that help her heal in her mind, body, and spirit. The video had been filmed with her children nearby and released with almost none of the usual communication scaffolding, no briefing to friendly journalists in advance, no palace spokesperson managing the message in real time. It was a woman speaking to camera about something terrifying and real, and the response was one of the most significant outpourings of public warmth directed at any member of the royal family since the death of Princess Diana. The months of treatment that followed were conducted almost entirely in private, which was both medically necessary and publicly unusual for someone whose every appearance has been catalogued and analyzed since she was first photographed leaving Williams University accommodation in 2004. She underwent preventative chemotherapy through the spring and summer months of 2024, with Kensington Palace providing only the most essential updates and declining to specify the type of cancer she had been treated for. A level of medical privacy the family maintained throughout the entire course of treatment and continues to maintain today. What was visible in the rare, carefully managed glimpses the public received during this period was a woman who was clearly managing something physically demanding while simultaneously protecting her children from the full weight of it and continuing to support a husband who was, by every account, carrying an enormous institutional load on her behalf at the same time. Trooping the color in June 2024 was her first significant public appearance after the diagnosis, and the moment she arrived in the carriage procession that forms part of the ceremony, the crowd's response was audible and immediate in a way that went beyond the usual patriotic enthusiasm. People who had been watching her absence for months, who had followed every theory and every leaked statement, who had seen the video and understood for the first time what she had been carrying, responded with something closer to collective relief than to simple celebration. She was there. She was upright and present and smiling. She had made it to June, which felt, after months of uncertainty, like something worth celebrating in its own right. The images of her at that ceremony, waving from the carriage with her 3 children beside her, became some of the most widely shared royal photographs of the entire year. By September, she announced she had completed chemotherapy. The announcement was made in a way that had become characteristic of her new approach to public communication, directly, personally, without institutional intermediary, through a soft-focus video filmed outdoors, surrounded by nature, dressed in something comfortable and real, rather than ceremonial. She said her path to healing and full recovery was long, that she had to continue taking each day as it came. She said she was looking forward to being back at work. She thanked everyone who had sent messages of support, and she did so with a specificity and a warmth that suggested she had actually read many of them, that they had genuinely reached her during the difficult months when public invisibility and private suffering had been the shape of her daily life. January 2025 brought the announcement that she was in remission, a word that carries its own particular weight for anyone who has ever waited to hear it. She spent the day of that announcement not at a palace or a formal engagement but at the Royal Marsden Hospital, visiting cancer patients who were still in the middle of their own treatment journeys, in what became one of the most widely praised pieces of symbolic communication the palace had managed in years. Rather than marking her own remission with celebration or ceremony, she spent it sitting with people who were where she had been months earlier, doing exactly what the chemotherapy volunteer at Charing Cross would later confirm she was able to do with absolute authenticity, meeting someone in their fear with the specific, unperformable understanding of someone who has been there too. The return to public duties across 2025 was characterized by a deliberate pace that reflected something her communications team and royal expert Robert Jobson both described explicitly: the understanding that she would not be returning to her old patterns of working. She completed 68 engagements that year, enough to place her 10th on the most active working royals list, but far below the 128 she had managed in 2023, her last full working year before the diagnosis. Those 68 appearances were carefully chosen, calibrated to be manageable within the reality of a recovery that both she and the palace had been consistent about describing as ongoing rather than complete, focused around causes that had become more personally significant during her treatment, rather than simply maintaining the full pre-diagnosis breadth of her patronage commitments. What 2026 has represented and what the phrase comeback actually means in her specific case is something considerably more nuanced than a simple resumption of a schedule. It is a return shaped by what she learned about herself, about what matters to her, about the specific things that helped her survive the experience and that she now believes can help others in ways that are already fundamentally different from the public role she occupied before her diagnosis. Royal author Robert Jobson put it plainly when he told Hello magazine early in the year that the days of just powering through are done, that she had learnt the lesson that her old pace represented. The person who has come back is the same person who left, but she understands herself differently, and that understanding is reshaping everything from which engagements she prioritizes to how she communicates about her own experience within the public role that remains both her obligation and her purpose. What is genuinely striking about how the public responded to Kate's video announcement in March 2024, and what became more striking in retrospect as the months of her treatment unfolded, was the degree to which it fundamentally shifted her relationship with a British public that had always admired her without ever quite knowing her. For the better part of a decade before the diagnosis, Kate had occupied an interesting and somewhat paradoxical position in British public life. She was universally considered one of the most effective members of the royal family in terms of public presentation, praised endlessly for her style, for her warmth in public engagements, for the way she connected naturally with ordinary people in the walk-around situations that royal duties routinely require. And yet, there was also a persistent sense, voiced periodically in columns and in conversations, that she remained somewhat opaque as a person, that the consistency and control of her public image made it difficult to feel you truly knew what she actually thought about anything, that the Polish was real, but also a kind of barrier. The cancer diagnosis and the specific way she chose to disclose and then navigate it dissolved that barrier more completely than anything in her 13 years of royal life before it had managed to do. She spoke directly. She used plain language rather than institutional language. She acknowledged that it had been an incredibly tough time for her family. She asked for privacy while also offering transparency about the basic facts. She did not hide behind a spokesperson or a carefully worded palace statement. She sat in a garden in Windsor and looked into a camera and told the truth, and the public responded not with the polite admiration that had always characterized their relationship with her, but with something considerably warmer and more personal than that. Messages flooded social media platforms at a scale that palace aides described as overwhelming. Women across the country who had their own cancer experiences wrote about what her disclosure meant to them, about the way it reached into something private and made it feel less alone. The specific demographic that had been most ambivalent about her before the announcement, younger women who had found her image slightly too polished, too perfectly maintained, too relentlessly together to fully identify with, responded to the March 2024 video with a warmth that her years of flawlessly executed public duties had never managed to generate. The Wimbledon appearance in July of 2024 deserves its own careful attention because of what it illustrated about the specific texture of public warmth Kate was now able to command. Wimbledon has been one of her most consistent and most beloved royal engagements for years. Her tennis fandom genuine rather than performed. Her presence in the royal box a fixture that generates its own excitement among both the crowd at the courts and the audience watching at home. In 2024, arriving mid-treatment, thinner than anyone had seen her since her royal duties began, she received a standing ovation as she entered the royal box with her daughter, Princess Charlotte. The standing ovation at Wimbledon was not simply an expression of enthusiasm for the royal family. It was a piece of collective emotional acknowledgement, a crowded room full of people expressing, through the only gesture available to them in that context, that they had followed her journey, that they were glad she was there, that her presence mattered to them in a way that had shifted from admiration to something closer to genuine personal affection during the months when her absence had made them realize how much they were used to her being part of the landscape. The royal warrants announcement, which came into effect in spring of 2026, extended the institutional significance of her return beyond the personal and into the genuinely constitutional. As noted elsewhere in coverage of the Wales couple's expanding role, Kate became the first Princess of Wales to hold the authority to grant royal warrants in 116 years, since Queen Mary held the role before her husband became King George V in 1910. That Princess Diana never held this same authority during her years as Princess of Wales is a detail that speaks directly to how differently the institution now regards Catherine's position within the family and the preparation for eventual kingship that she and William represent together. The commercial implications of the Kate effect, the documented, extensively studied phenomenon by which her choice to wear a particular garment or carry a particular bag produces an immediate, sometimes website-crashing surge in demand for that product, have been real for years. The Royal Warrant Authority formalizes that economic influence into something with genuine institutional weight, transforming what had been an informal and unregulated form of royal endorsement into a structured mechanism with real, official, royal approval attached to it. The Earthshot Prize work, which Kate has supported consistently throughout William's leadership of the initiative, and which their joint appearance at the 2026 Rio ceremony demonstrated, can command international attention without the full institutional scaffolding of a traditional royal tour, represents another dimension of the comeback that is easily underestimated, because it doesn't generate the same kind of vivid, single-image coverage that ceremonial appearances do. But the consistency of her commitment to it, maintained through the diagnosis and through treatment and through recovery, signals something about what she and William understand their joint public role to actually be for in this chapter of their lives and in the institution's history. They are not simply filling the calendar of state duty that royal life requires. They are building something with a point of view and a direction, a sense of what the monarchy should actually be contributing to the country and the world in the decades ahead. And Kate's return to full participation in that project is one of the things the institution needed most from her comeback. Described by a palace aide to the Mirror as centered on the healing power of creativity, represents the most direct translation of her personal recovery experience into public purpose that she has yet attempted. During her months of treatment, she has spoken about the specific role that creativity, being in nature, focusing on the simple, restorative pleasure of making things, played in helping her manage the physical and emotional demands of what she was going through. This isn't a polished institutional talking point developed by communications advisors looking for a new cause to attach to her name. It is something she has described from her own lived experience, connecting directly to interests she has held throughout her adult life, her serious commitment to photography, her love of painting and drawing and music, her long-standing belief in the early years developmental work that has defined the substantive core of her royal role for over a decade. The creativity focus connects all of those pre-existing commitments to something newly personal and newly authoritative in a way that transforms what might otherwise have been a charming but relatively soft charitable interest into something she can speak about with the specific weight of genuine experience. Her visit to Reggio Emilia in northern Italy in May of 2026, her first official international engagement since the December 2022 Boston trip for the Earthshot Prize, was the clearest signal the palace could have sent about the stage her recovery had reached. International visits require considerably more physical and logistical stamina than domestic engagements. They involve longer travel, denser schedules compressed into shorter windows, and the particular demands of representing the crown on foreign soil in contexts where every gesture carries diplomatic as well as personal significance. The fact that the visit was planned and announced and executed without any reported health complications, that she arrived in Italy wearing a blue pantsuit by Edeline Lee made from Italian woven fabrics, greeting crowds of Italian schoolchildren and civic leaders with the relaxed warmth that has always been one of her greatest public gifts, was the kind of milestone a recovery needs, not just for the institution's planning purposes, but for her own sense of what she is now capable of and where the limits of her rebuilt stamina actually lie. The procession of major ceremonial appearances through June of 2026 completed the public picture of a return that had been building steadily since January. St. Patrick's Day in Hampshire, attending the Irish Guards as their colonel, wearing a deep green coat and presenting shamrocks to the regiment's mascot wolfhound with visible delight. The Anzac Day service in Westminster, wearing Diana's cabochon sapphire earrings and a crimson poppy on a Givenchy coat dress, in a demonstration of the thoughtful, historically layered, sartorial communication that has become one of her most distinctive public qualities. The Order of the Garter service at Windsor on the 15th of June, wearing a Patrick McDowell design aptly named the Whales, in a moment of quiet symbolism, smiling alongside William as they departed the chapel in photographs that circulated around the world within minutes of being taken. And Royal Ascot the following week, re-wearing a custom Roxanda Marigold yellow dress for day 2, her first appearance at the racecourse in 2 years, in the winner's enclosure, laughing, presenting a trophy, visibly and entirely present in a moment that the press, watching for every signal of how genuinely recovered she actually was, received as the most vivid evidence yet that the comeback was complete and real. Her early childhood development work, which she had been building steadily since around 2018 into one of the most substantive and genuinely evidence-based portfolios any member of the royal family has assembled, gained an unexpected new dimension through the experience of her own illness in a way that nobody involved could have anticipated when she first began commissioning research and building the Royal Foundation Center for Early Childhood. The specific argument she has been making for years, that the experiences of children in their earliest years, from conception to age 5, have a profound and lasting effect on the adults they become, on their emotional resilience, their capacity to manage stress, their ability to form healthy relationships, is an argument that intersected directly with her own experience of navigating a serious illness while simultaneously protecting 3 young children from its full weight. She has spoken about the particular effort involved in explaining to George, Charlotte, and Louis what was happening in a way that was honest without being overwhelming, in a way that preserved their sense of security while also respecting their ability to understand something difficult. That experience of being a parent managing serious illness while also being deeply committed to protecting her children's emotional well-being, gave the early childhood work a personal authority it had previously only had in the abstract. The Italy visit to Reggio Emilia was built explicitly around this connection, taking Kate into a school system internationally recognized for its approach to child-led, nature-immersed, creativity-centered early learning, an approach that aligns precisely with both her long-standing research on early childhood and with the new creative healing focus she announced for her 2026 work. Watching her sit with Italian preschoolers in a garden, listening to a morning assembly, clearly moved by the particular quality of joy and curiosity visible in a room full of very small children given the freedom to follow their own interests. A royal aide described the visit as a huge moment for her and for her post-recovery public role, noting that she wants to create a global conversation around what early childhood development looks like at its best, not just in Britain, but across different cultures and different systems. There are people close to Kate who have described something that happened during her recovery that has not made it into any official statement or any formal interview, but that has circulated through the reporting on this period in enough detail to be treated as credible. It is the account of a woman who discovered, during the months when the external demands on her life were temporarily stripped away, that the version of herself that existed in the quieter, slower, more internally focused conditions that her recovery required was a version she preferred in important ways to the one that had been constructed across the preceding decade of relentless public duty. Not that she doesn't love the work, not that she wants to step back from it in any way that would make the pre-diagnosis workload seem like something she's reluctant to return to, but that the pace and the direction of how she had been working, the sheer cumulative weight of always being on and always being seen and always being managed and always being assessed, had been costing her something she hadn't fully acknowledged until its removal revealed what it had been taking. The phrase "the days of just powering through are done" is Robert Jobson's summary of information from people around her. Its accuracy is evident in how she has actually organized her return. What the monarchy gains from Kate's comeback, beyond the obvious restoration of one of its most publicly effective members to its active roster, is something harder to quantify but genuinely significant for the institution's longer-term future. It gains a future queen who has been tested by something real and who came through it in a way that was visible, honest, and deeply human, who now carries in her public role the specific, irreplaceable authority of lived experience that no amount of training or preparation can manufacture. Every person in Britain who has had cancer, or who has had a parent or sibling or spouse or child with cancer, which is to say an enormous proportion of the population, now has a different relationship with Kate than they did before March of 2024. That relationship is not simply admiration. It is something closer to identification, the particular bond that forms between people who have shared a recognizable experience, even when the specifics of their lives are as different as a working-class family managing NHS waiting times and a princess in the most famous family in the world. The "I know" she said in Charing Cross Hospital in January was the sound of that bond being established in real time, casually and without ceremony, in the plain language of someone for whom it was simply true. The ways that 2 years of illness and recovery have permanently changed something about who she is in public is visible not in the grand ceremonial appearances, but in the smaller, less scripted moments scattered throughout her 2026 schedule, telling a musician playing harp in a hospital ward that it was very relaxing, discussing with a patient how the holistic support alongside the medical treatment helps the days go past, telling a brewery owner in Bermondsey, matter-of-factly and without apparent calculation, that since her diagnosis, she hadn't had much alcohol and that it was something she now had to be a lot more conscious of. And telling a therapist she met during her January visits to the north of England how creativity and play get lost in adults, how one of her own children plays guitar and another plays drums, and how they keep her playful, the kind of informal, personally revealing details she would previously have been unlikely to share in the course of an official engagement with a professional she had just met. These moments of unguarded naturalness, appearing in conversations overheard by the journalists accompanying her, are not the product of a changed communication strategy. They are the product of a changed person, someone whose relationship with her own public self has been permanently altered by the experience of having that self temporarily stripped away entirely and then gradually and painfully rebuilt. Catherine, Princess of Wales, at 44 in the summer of 2026, has come back not simply to where she was before, but to somewhere new, somewhere she could only have arrived by going through what she went through. And that, in the end, is what makes the comeback powerful, in a way that goes far beyond any single image or any single ceremony. It is the power of someone who came back not as the same person, but as a fuller, deeper, more real version of the one who left. Catherine, Princess of Wales, at 44 years old, in the summer of 2026, is not simply a future queen who had cancer and recovered. She is someone who went through something that changed how she understands herself, what she values, what she believes her public role is actually for, and who is now building the next chapter of that role with the quiet confidence of someone who has been tested in a way that most people never have to be, and who knows something on the other side of that test that she could not have known before. The comeback is not the restoration of what existed before. It is the emergence of something that could not have existed without everything that happened in between. And that, in the end, is what makes it powerful in a way that goes well beyond the yellow dress at Royal Ascot, or the smiling photograph at the Garter service, or any single image from any single magnificent public appearance. It is the power of someone who came back not as the same person, but as a better, deeper, more real version of the one who left.